welcome to the Newsdesk Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Well, today's discussion is on a somewhat serious note as we see what is happening in our neighborhood with the Taliban taking less than 10 days to overrun Afghanistan. What is the impact and the message for India as we see a resurgent AFPAK on our borders? We already know where Imran Khan stands. If there was any doubt, his recent statement saying there's an end to slavery in Afghanistan makes it very clear as to what is going to be happening as far as he is concerned. Will the ISI and the Taliban-backed militants, will they now turn to Kashmir? That is the big worry for India. How have we been handling this crisis so far? What should we do next? This is something that I'm going to be discussing. I have joining me Ram Madhav, he's a member of the RSS National Executive, and Manish Tiwari, he's a former UPA minister and also a senior national spokesperson of the Congress Party. Manish, how has the Congress been handling how has the government been handling the situation so far? And because I know you and I had a discussion earlier where you had said that we have no choice but to talk to the Taliban. Now, of course, the Taliban is really there, so we don't have a choice anymore anyway.
Well, Priya, the fact is that India has never been a player in Afghanistan in the strategic sense of the term going back to 1979. It is true that after 2001, we did invest in building some infrastructure in Afghanistan in terms of highways and schools and their parliament building. But the sum total of our investment was equivalent to what the coalition at that point in time, the US-led coalition, was spending every day on the so-called quote-unquote war on terror. But the manner in which the collapse has taken place over the past 10 days, and the Taliban has just kind of walked over and walked through Afghanistan, sends out two very, very clear messages. One, the entire national reconstruction effort of the US, unfortunately, in terms of at least the capacity building of their military, was a complete chimera, because it is unbelievable that a force of 450,000 people, including special forces, police forces, the Afghan National Army, it just kind of vanished like the gypsy camp vanished into the blue in front of 60,000 Taliban. Number two, my sense is that the Pakistani army, regulars or irregulars, were really in the vanguard of the sweep. The Taliban would, in fact, come in later and perform a holding operation. So therefore, whether you like it or not, Afghanistan represents a huge victory for the Pakistani deep state. And the entire Doha process, which Ambassador Khalilzad led, has handed over Afghanistan to Pakistan once again as its strategic depth. And so therefore, it just does leave India in a very serious quandary. And your apprehension is the apprehension of every strategic thinker in this country, that what will happen next in Jammu and Kashmir, in Punjab, and areas where the ISI has been fiddling around, now going back to the Multan Conference of 1972, when they decided to bleed India with 1,000 cuts and go nuclear. So yes, the situation is very worrying, and this is not about the NDA, BJP versus the Congress, or the opposition versus the government. I think all of us collectively need to realize the gravity of the situation and the implications which this victory of the Taliban in Afghanistan represents.
I'll take our concerns to Ram Madhav because he's also a geostrategic affairs expert. He's written a lot of books on China, especially. Ram Madhav, what are your apprehensions regarding what is happening in Afghanistan? And how should we react?
Yes, what Mr. Manish Tiwari has just now said is what most of the people who follow the developments, who understand strategic implications of such developments, most of us feel the same way. It is definitely not only a victory for the Taliban, but also a significant victory for Pakistan. Only thing that probably I will add is that the rise of Taliban at this juncture in Afghanistan, when in the last 2 decades, huge efforts were made to curb Islamic radicalism in other parts of the Middle East, other parts of the that region. uh, should definitely alert all the countries, not just America, not just India, but even countries like Russia, China, others also should understand that while none of us anticipated the pace at which the whole sequence of events has happened in Afghanistan, we have not anticipated. Even America was telling us that it will take 90 days for Taliban to reach Kabul and all that, but it happened so swiftly. But everybody should understand that such forces which have a theology which guides them, they are not going to be a problem only to India or to US alone. They can become, if not controlled, if not moderated a little bit, they can become a challenge to even China tomorrow, even to other countries. So if that realization comes, and if all of us can work together to ensure that Taliban doesn't really become a monster, we can see things happening differently. But as I said, going by the history, it is definitely going to be a serious strategic and security challenge for India. We have to be definitely preparing for certain critical situations.
Having said the challenge for India, the biggest challenge, Manish, is really going to be in Kashmir. That is somewhere where Pakistan will also direct, as I said, the action of the Taliban's too. So do you think, given that sense, is there an urgency to hold elections over there earlier rather than later? Would that send a better message?
Look, Priya, there are two aspects to the issue. One is, what does the victory of Taliban mean for Afghanistan? I recall some years back, I was at a strategic affairs conference in Oman. In fact, Mr. Ram Madhav and I were there together a couple of years after that. So early in the morning, I ran into the former chief of the Afghan National Army. And so I asked him, I said, what is the situation in Afghanistan? And he tells me that, look, we have 100 newspapers, we have 40 television stations, we have so many radio stations, so many girls are going to school. Anybody can walk up to the president and tell him that you are wrong. So he was not calculating Afghanistan in terms of tangibles. He was not telling me that we defeated the Taliban in Nangarhar or we vanquished them. He was talking about the human advancement which Afghanistan had made over all these years. If I remember correctly, it was 2016 or 17. And there is going to be a complete rollback of that, because irrespective of the platitudes which the Taliban is mouthing at this point in time, the fact is that the stories which are emerging out of Afghanistan are horrific, to say the least. And so therefore, for an ordinary Afghan who has not seen or who's seen violence as the normal going back to 1979, and if that person who was born in 79 was alive today, he would be, let's say, 40 years old or somewhere around that. For him, it looks to be another interminable stretch of strife and violence. Then the second part, where I agree with Mr. Ram Madhav, is that would it become a safe haven, a launching pad for terrorists again? More profound than that is, what will it do to radicalism and extremism in terms of exacerbating Islamic fundamentalism and people who kind of lean onto the Islamic ideology in order to justify their violence? And this has implications. It has implications for Pakistan also. Pakistan has become a hugely radicalized and polarized society because of all the shenanigans they've been doing in Afghanistan, going back now almost 4 decades. And it will have implications for India. It will have implications even for China in terms of their Xinjiang region. It will have implications for Turkmenistan and the other stans, because those people are the only ones who are still resisting the Taliban today in the form of the Northern Alliance. The Panjshir Valley has still not fallen. So it's a deeply complicated and evolving situation. And India would have to be very careful and not take its eye off the ball. And Mr. Madhav is right. I mean, in the sense, if you want to score brownie points, we can kind of do that to and fro. But the fact is that nobody anticipated the pace of events. I mean, not the least the United States, for whom it looks like another Vietnam moment at this point in time.
Fair enough.
To add to it, Priya, one thing that probably we all have to probably understand carefully, or seriously rather, is that you see Afghan National Army is over 300,000 strong. They are there. They have not fought back. They have surrendered or whatever, but they are there. Now you are adding another 80,000 or 100,000 Taliban trained mercenaries now. Now, what will happen to these 80,000 or 100,000 Taliban soldiers? That's a very big question. Now, either the Taliban regime accommodates them in the Afghan National Army, whether such a thing is possible, or they will be deployed, I will call it elsewhere. What is that elsewhere? Can Pakistan be completely uninfluenced by these forces? What do they do with these people who have, half of them, at least 35,000 of them have been trained by ISI in Quetta. The camps used to be there. So those elements need to be reined in, which is going to be not only a big challenge for Taliban, but also for Pakistan. Having created it, now it has to manage them. So there we have a danger. Yes, they may try and use them in areas like Kashmir and Punjab, but they will also be an equally big headache to Pakistan. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan can today become a big monster in Pakistan. Taliban may want a similar kind of government in Pakistan also, which is going to be a big problem for us definitely, but also a problem for Pakistan. I only think that this goody-goody language that Taliban using right now is because of two reasons. One is, as Mr. Tiwari rightly mentioned, they still have to get full control over Afghanistan. In fact, Amrullah Saleh and Ahmad Shah Massoud's son and all are actually now planning to mobilize a big resistance in Panjshir area, although borders are not open for them. So that is one factor. The other factor, if you recall, when the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979, if you recall the statements of Khomeini those days, they used to be very moderate. They used to be very friendly. So initially years, until they actually gained full control over Iran, they behaved as though they are friends of everybody, friends of India, friends of everybody. But once they gained full control, the picture was different. So Taliban also, I suspect, they cannot really shed their colors, although the top leadership right now is making very good noises.
Manish, the larger picture on India's place in the neighborhood.
Look, Priya, the fact is that at different points in time, we've had problems with our neighbors. With China, it's been a long-standing issue because the Chinese are not willing to settle the borders. They've settled borders with, I think, 15 out of the 17 countries with which they have land boundary borders. The only two which are not settled is India and, by extension, Bhutan. And their real disputes are in the maritime domain, in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, where they feel that they have significant claims because of the mineral wealth which is there in those seas. So therefore, under those circumstances, China has been a legacy problem. And similarly with Pakistan. I mean, with Pakistan, it all goes back to the dismemberment of Pakistan in 1971 and the creation of Bangladesh. It's left a psychological scar on the Pakistani deep state, which they have never been able to surmount. So therefore, under those circumstances, India needs to take a long view. And you need to create a multi-partisan consensus of what India's foreign policy should be. This consensus held the field between 1947 and 1991. I mean, there may have been some quibbles here and there, but broadly there was a consensus with regard to India's foreign policy. That consensus effectively started breaking down with the Indo-US civil nuclear engagement and the manner in which it was unfortunately opposed. And after that, it has not really stopped. While there are no substantive differences, but there is also not that multi-partisanship which India requires because we live in an extremely complicated and a volatile world. And so, therefore, I think it's incumbent on people on each side of the aisle, those who follow strategic affairs, those who have an interest in international relations, to so try and create that modus vivendi, whereby we have that minimum consensus, which can kind of live through maybe changes of regimes and administrations. It is that continuity which India requires in its foreign policy and strategic affairs to navigate the world over the next 3 decades. I mean, that's my view.
What is your view of India's place in a very troubled neighborhood?
In the neighborhood, because we have a competitor in China, there are bound to be ups and downs in relationships with our neighbors. It's bound to happen because on issues, not today, right from the time of our independence, we have had various types of issues. Initially with China, with Nepal, we used to have huge issues with the Maharaja of Nepal. Subsequently, we managed it like that. It kept on happening. We had issues with Sri Lanka, and we were actually at one point forced to send our naval vessel to Colombo. We had to station it in Colombo. Such was the situation at one point. These things do happen because we have a competition in the region, in our neighborhood. Having said it, I strongly feel this, is a personal view. I don't know if my party and my others will agree with me fully, but the two very cardinal principles that we have set for ourselves in our foreign policy, right at the time of independence, are very, very relevant even to this day. Number one, the Asian preeminence. Our first playground is Asia. You cannot ignore your neighborhood, your extended neighborhood of West Asia and ASEAN and all that, and then only build relations with America and Europe. Of course, you do that. But right from Nehru's time, the one commitment was that, okay, in foreign policy, our first preeminent role will be with the Asian neighborhood. The second was, that time we called it non-alignment. Now we are calling it strategic autonomy. I mean, words change, expressions change with time. But the point remains that we will not become a camp follower of any one country. Based on interests, okay, today our interests align more with America, we buy more from them, we do more trade with them, we seek more help from them. But that doesn't mean we give up on our relations with either Russia or Iran. This was a set principle right at the time of independence. The two principles, as I said, Asian preeminence and non-alignment or strategic autonomy. I think these two are very important, especially when our region, the Indo-Pacific or Eurasia, these both regions, when they are both becoming strategically very important, we are incidentally, we are in the middle of the two regions. One is Eurasia, led by Russia and China. The other is Indo-Pacific, led by America, India, Japan, and Australia. We are right in the middle. So we have to, scrupulously stick to those two principles. That's what I believe.
Your reaction to this, and also in the past, I don't know whether you want to talk about this, but there was a time when India was asked to send boots on the ground in Afghanistan. We didn't. Was that a mistake, or do you think in the end that was a smart move?
Is that a question you're addressing to me?
To you, Manish.
Well, I think the first time we were called upon to really engage outside the country after the Sri Lanka episode between 1987 and 1990 was when the war on terror was unfolding in Iraq. So therefore, there was almost a formal request from the coalition that India should put boots on the ground. But Prime Minister Vajpayee rightly decided and refrained from that commitment. And I think that was absolutely the correct decision to take. Eventually, the way things panned out in Iraq, they vindicated the position which Prime Minister Vajpayee and his then National Security Advisor, Mr. Brajesh Mishra, had taken. And the way things have panned out in Afghanistan also vindicates the fact that we were correct in only engaging with Afghanistan in terms of non-coercive diplomacy. Because eventually, if after 2 decades of American presence and $2 billion spent every day, casualties on all sides, if the whole thing was really a chimera and it did not, it was resting on foundations of sand. Even if we would have put boots on the ground, we wouldn't have been any better. So I think India requires the next 3 decades as space for consolidation. We have internal challenges to surmount. And that's why we should navigate our external space, primarily based upon our enlightened self-interest. And I don't think it is in our self-interest to militarily engage in any other extraterritorial geography beyond what is our domain of influence or interest in the Indian Ocean and the North Arabian Sea.
Should we? What do we do now? Now that there is going to be a Taliban-led government soon in Afghanistan, everything is pointing towards that. Should we engage with them? Should we try and we know back-channel talks have been happening, so we've been told by sources. But now, what do we do?
No, just wait for some time. Where is this hurry for deciding about what needs to be done today? We need to give some time for things to, take a shape in Afghanistan. I strongly believe. I just want to go back to that question you asked Mr. Manish Tiwari.
Yeah.
You see, the last time that we had our boots on the ground situation was in Sri Lanka. After the Sri Lanka experience, a conscious decision was taken that only when UN-assigned missions happen, we send our soldiers. Otherwise, we generally don't go into bilateral issues or NATO agendas and all that. We don't get into them. What he also rightly pointed out, what America and NATO could not do, our soldiers on the ground could have achieved. That is probably not a very right thing to think. But what happened in Afghanistan was, the failure partly should be attributed, don't call it as victim shaming, but the responsibility of it should go to the government there also. We stood fully behind the government. We supported them. Okay, not necessarily militarily, but in other aspects. But what you finally found was the president suddenly disappears one fine evening. That was not really expected. We expected that they would seek the help of other countries to finally find a solution between, some kind of an agreement between them and Taliban. Whether it would have been possible or not, we don't know, but the talks were going on at Doha and all that. So that was something we could have done. We tried to do our bit. We stood by those democratic forces in Afghanistan.
And a bit about Manish, I'll ask you first the Trump versus Biden debate. We've heard people take Biden's first speech out saying that nothing will happen when America withdraws. We have all the right wingers saying, see, all those who shamed Trump, now look at what you got with Biden, a guy who's not even thinking. So how do you see their both reactions in handling Afghanistan?
Well, I don't think it's about President Trump or President Biden alone. I think from President Barack Obama onwards, or even going back to the 2006 review, which President Bush had initiated with regard to both Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a desire in the US to disengage. And over the years, there was complete fatigue insofar as US public opinion was concerned, and even for that matter, the strategic community was concerned that, look, we have to end America's longest war. Could it have ended better? Perhaps. But then, when you decide to withdraw, if you go by historical precedent, it invariably ends up ending this way. And it's not that Afghanistan is the first state which has collapsed or the first armed forces which had collapsed. The Pakistani army had similarly collapsed in Bangladesh in 1971. So stuff happens. And therefore, you have to deal on the basis of the given reality. And I agree with Mr. Ram Madhav. Let's wait and see how the situation evolves and accordingly take a decision in our enlightened national interest.
Last word to Ram Madhav, especially when you mentioned national interest, and we have the guardians of national interest right here. But since this has been a very mature, comprehensive conversation, so I'm not going to partisan. But in terms of the US reaction, how would you see the Biden versus Trump debate?
No, it's a very meaningless debate. This Trump bhakti did not come into picture now. But what all Trump did with North Korea, with Kim Jong-un and all that is also a recorded history. So it's not about that. There is generally in these matters, there is a bipartisan consensus in America. Why should we create a problem in India about it? They are together. There is no dispute in America except in some commentaries and all that. So I think it's a meaningless discussion in India.
On that note, thank you both, as I said earlier, for a very comprehensive and a very mature conversation on a topic that we discussed issues really and didn't go into the usual the level of debates that are happening there. So thank you both for this conversation, and well, we're keeping an eye on what is happening in our neighborhood. But
that's why we come to your show, Priya, because you can have a conversation.
Thank you, Manish, for that note. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.